Hey, everybody. Welcome back for part 2 with the one, the only, the living legend, the GOAT with a mic, Mr. Leigh Diffey. We hope you enjoyed part 1 last week. And now the conclusion of the interview is coming your way. So what were your interactions with Bernie Ecclestone like? I got to ask, was it all just very like formal emails back and forth, or did you ever get to kind of have a conversation with the guy?
No, I cold called him. I just picked up the phone in Australia and rang and got his secretary, and she said, I'll pass the message on, and Mr. Ecclestone will be in touch. And I was like, yeah. And he did. He called back, and he called back. They were several months apart, but he did. I spoke to him twice, and he was just very matter of fact and very straightforward. And then when I actually got to meet him in person, I reminded him of those stories, but that wasn't for many years later, like when I was calling F1 on NBC. And just my own personal experience with him was terrific. He couldn't have been friendlier. But, you know, as you know, very diminutive man in physical stature, but just such a
powerhouse,
a powerhouse and a visionary. And, you know, Formula One has gone to a different level now, but Formula One would never be at the level now that it is without Bernie.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And even though he's 90-something years old now and technically not involved, he apparently still pretty involved behind the scenes. He still does quite a bit. He's got his fingers in a lot of different things going on in the F1 world, which I think is hilarious. Yeah. So you missed out on the F1 gig, but then other opportunities came up stateside.
So that was kind of the rationale behind my thinking was, well, what's the next best thing? The next best thing to F1 is IndyCar. And I had called 2 kart races that went overseas. In fact, you were talking about Ben Edwards. Ben and I called that fateful race in Germany when Alex Zanardi lost his legs. Mm-hmm. And then the following week...
Was that not your first... That was your first kart race, right? It was your first IndyCar race that you called?
I'd done IndyCar in Australia.
Okay.
So, yeah, but it was my first overseas IndyCar race. And Townsend was in that race as well.
Right.
At the Lausitz ring. And then the following week was the one in the UK at Rockingham Speedway, which it was so delayed. There were weepers on the track. And then it was that mega race between Kenny Brack and the now sadly late Gilles de Ferran. And it was because of that I got exposed to the kart people. And I have a friend I used to get back in Australia. I used to get free clothing from No Fear. And,
okay.
And when I moved to the UK, my friends from No Fear Australia said, "Oh, we'll hook you up with the people from No Fear in the UK." So I met these people, and they were Americans. They were Norwegian Americans, and they were some of the originals back at No Fear in the US, but they had moved to the UK because they wanted to be closer to Norway and eventually moved back to Norway. And so we'd become really good friends over a couple of years. And they said, "Well, listen, we've got a really good friend who's got an in at kart, and he might be able to help you. And he's actually going to be in London here soon. Why don't you meet up with him?" And I went and met him, and we met and had a beer at a pub. And he's like, "Well, give me the story again." So I told him about, I missed out on the ITV F1 thing. He goes, "Hang on, leave it with me." So he goes, "Right then." He goes, "Dut, dut, dut." And he rings Chris Pook, the CEO, and he's like, "Chris, it's Jim. Got this young guy here. Formula One really want him. Why wouldn't we want him on kart?" "Yeah, that's what I said." "Okay, the international coverage? All right, great." He goes, "Here, let's have another beer." He goes, "You're probably going to get a phone call shortly." And within 5 minutes or something, I got a phone call from Kart International, the head of Kart International, and said, "Hi, it's Don Helms from Kart, and we're interested, young man, if you'd be interested in coming to America and work for us." I said, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." So within a matter of months, I was moving to the US.
Sitting at a pub having a beer. I'm just saying.
When I go out and have a beer, all I get is a hangover.
Yeah.
you're like advancing your career. Like
you get a bill first. You get a bill and then a hangover.
That's true.
Yeah.
Actually, I think the problem is I don't go out for a beer. I go out for 15 whiskeys.
Yeah.
It's
harder to impress a potential employer after 15 whiskeys, unless, well, it depends who your employer is. So again, then it's another jumping in both feet, blind move now from the UK to the US. Yep. And you said the international broadcast. So were you just doing that side of things?
just doing that side of it. And when I first came to the US, the visa that I had would only allow me to work for CART, and it was just those weekends. So it was a pretty cushy year because I just did, I don't know, whatever there was, 19 races that year or 18 races. And so that was, I had a lot of spare time, played a lot of golf with Calvin Fish and lived in Atlanta, and it was pretty nice. I would do stuff overseas. I'd go back to Australia or back to the UK and do some various things. But it was a big change, like going from Australia to the UK and then coming to the States. I'd never lived in America, and so it was great to travel around to all the different tracks that I'd only ever seen on TV and learn about the different states and different cultures within the US, and that was a lot of fun. And then it's kind of like this looping theme and connecting theme by being in the CART paddock. Even though I wasn't heard here in America, I was working with our old friend Jeremy Shaw, who you did one of your first commentaries with. Mm-hmm. And Jeremy and I did the commentary for CART for the rest of the English-speaking world. And so that, because I was in the same TV compound as then all the Speed Channel people, that it exposed me to them. And there was a race where they said, listen, we need a hand. We need a couple of people to commentate the Barber Dodge Pro Series. I was like, what the hell's the Barber Dodge Pro Series? And anyway, lo and behold, in that was Danica Patrick, AJ Armendinger, Memo Rojas.
Was Hunter Ray there yet, or was that
Ryan? That wasn't Ryan's year, but there was Tommy Fogarty and just a bunch of people who really went on. Christian Shimshak, who's racing back in IMSA now. I've all these really good kids. And so I commentated that, and I think I did one or two races before I got a call from somebody at Speed Channel who said, I want to have a meeting with you in Miami. And so I went off and had this clandestine meeting in the TV compound, and they said, we want you to come and work for Speed Channel full-time. I want you to do sports cars, motorcycles, blah, blah, blah. And that was the beginning of a decade-long and really lovely relationship with Speed Channel.
Man, I miss Speed Channel. That was such a cool concept. Like, there were so many forms of racing because it was Speed Vision originally, right?
Yeah.
And there were so many different forms of racing that I got exposed to exclusively because of that channel, and coming home after school and turning it on and seeing all the like BTCC and V8 supercars and all that stuff. Yeah. I know it changed a lot by the time it was Speed Channel and by the end. And so, you said it was 10 years there at Speed Channel?
10 years. I did, there was like a little gap in the middle. While all this, the story sounds rosy and great opportunities and all that, I was just like a driver. I was so determined and driven that, there are costs to it. And unfortunately, I lost my first marriage, due to my single vision and drive and determination to, chase this career. And so there's, it's not all champagne. It's not all rosy, roses, right? No, yeah. So I had just by circumstance, I had to go back to Australia to sort that out. And I was lucky enough to go back to my old home at Network 10 and do Formula One and MotoGP and V8 supercars. And it was a great 2 years, and so great because I met my wife, and who we now have 2 kids with. And we came, when I met my wife, she was looking for a change in scenery from the Gold Coast, and she was thinking about going somewhere. And I said, well, I can tell you I'm only here for a short time. I'm going back to America. And she said, let's do it. And so did a couple of years at Network 10, came back to Speed Channel, and then it wasn't a handful of years before the NBC opportunity arose. So
sorry, just to backtrack that a little bit, what sent you away from Speed Channel the first time was you had to go back home to take care of that stuff.
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah. So that big life event resulted in a big switch in work opportunity, but everything happens for a reason, and it kind of worked out for the best in a way.
Yeah, and Speed were really good about it, like very compassionate and understanding about it, and said, but listen, we'll only bend so far. You're not going to break us here. We still want you to come back and you got to do the Rolex 24, and we don't know who you're working with in Australia. Maybe you can connect us and we can work this out, but your schedule in Australia has to allow us to have you to do the Rolex 24 and the Le Mans 24. So cool. I was like, God, that's great. I'm fine with that. So, and then when I came back, I just pretty much picked up where I left off, and that was at the beginning of 2007.
And so then it was a few more years with Speed before NBC comes calling. And how does that opportunity arise? Who were you drinking with? What bar were you at when NBC called?
I I wasn't. It was
It was
through
the carrot cake.
It was through the enormous generosity of a former racer called Wally Dallenbach, and I had a chance to audition for a NASCAR play-by-play job on Turner, and one of the directors who came and worked on sports cars occasionally, Mike Wells, a legend of the industry. Mike was the full-time director for NASCAR on Turner and had done a bunch on NBC and a bunch. He ran his own production company very successfully for a long time. And he said to me, hey, they're having these tryouts. They need a play-by-play guy for the 6 Cup races on Turner. They're having these auditions, and I'm going to put your hat in the ring. So I went and did that audition. I had to go back to Australia. My dad had passed away, and they waited for me. And lo and behold, one of my bosses now, Jeff Benke, one of your bosses, James, was the boss at Turner then, and he was the guy.
Okay.
He was the guy conducting the auditions, and it was myself, Adam Alexander, and Rick Allen, and Wally Dallenbach was there, Kyle Petty was there, Larry McReynolds was there. It was a full-on audition. Like, we had to call the Homestead Championship finale from the year before. And I was going
to say, what is an audition like for that? I mean, like, everybody knows
bizarre.
what an audition is for an actor trying to get a role, but what is an audition like for a commentator?
Went into Turner Sports, and it was way more than I had ever imagined or given it credit for. Like, I thought just going to come in and do like 5 minutes of commentary or something like that. They had their full production team there. Barry Landis, the producer, Mike Wells, the director. They had all the talent. Larry McReynolds was sitting in a different room pretending to be on pit lane and doing strategy stuff while Wally Dallenbach and Kyle Petty and myself were in the booth. I mean, it was full on. It was just like one of our broadcasts, mate.
Yeah.
It was exactly the same. And I thought we were going to call for a little bit. They made me call about 150 laps.
So they made the other, like, everyone that you had to work with in that thing, they had to do that 3 times because they had to do it with you, they had to do it with Adam, and they had to do it with Rick. And Jeff made them wait for me to get back from Australia after my dad had passed. So how thrilled do you think they were waiting for me for yet another bloody audition? Anyway, it went really, really well. And I learnt many years later that, how do I say this politely? I think that I did get the job, but ultimately I didn't get the job because the big boss at Turner didn't prefer to have an accent calling the Cup races. So that's the way that went down. But Adam got the job, did a great job, but it was through that meeting of Wally Dallenbach, and I kind of knew Wally a little bit through Calvin Fish and Kyle Petty, that Wally was a big champion of mine. And when he heard that that NBC wanted to get somebody for both IndyCar and Formula One, he put a bug in Sam Flood's ear, and he was ultimately the conduit to bring me to Sam Flood. And it's a much longer story than that, but that's, I owe a lot to both Wally and Jeff Benke for the NBC opportunity happening. So had Benke moved to NBC by that point?
No, he was.
So he came afterwards. Yeah. It's crazy how it all kind of comes together, and I love that. I love the audition story.
It was full on. It was full on. I think the theme, like while we've been chatting, and I try and tell our sons this and any young people in the industry, I think the common theme or the common thread is that cherish your contacts, nurture those contacts, respect those contacts. And it's not all about what can they do for you. Make sure it's mutual and help them. And I've worked my ass off to be where I am, but I've also had some really, really great people help me along the way. So it's a combination of hard work with good fortune.
So NBC calls you up about IndyCar and F1. Mm-hmm. You have done every motorsports under the sun, bar dragsters at this point. At what stage? I mean, I wish we had 2 hours because we could go into everything there, but I want to get to this. At what stage do they come to you and say, okay, here's a sport that doesn't have an engine, but we want you to do it? Yeah. When does that conversation first happen, and what was it? I mean, were you getting thrown straight into Olympics? Was track and field the first non-motorsport? Like, how did that happen?
No, it was, they told me, Sam Flood, our big boss, told me straight away. He said, we're gonna throw some other things at you and see what sticks. And but it's going to be under the umbrella of race calling. So let's see. And we're signing you up for Formula One and for IndyCar, but the Olympics as well. And so the first Olympics were in 2014. So I started in 2013 with NBC. First Olympics for me was in 2014 in Sochi, Russia, and I was calling bobsled, skeleton, and luge. Which I had never called before.
Had you ever watched before? I had absolutely no knowledge or experience
loosely.
Yeah.
But I did go and do a World Cup luge event in Lake Placid, which I was really thankful to do that, like just to get some reps and see how it went and understand the cadence of a luge World Cup event and then how it works. And just how, like, think about when we do an IndyCar race or we do the 500, just how elongated the storytelling is, and you get a chance, it's you go, Townsend goes, I go, vice versa, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's two commentators in those sliding sports, and the run is over in like less than 40 seconds.
Right.
It's like, you set them up, they leave the start gate, and you're watching how they're driving, how they're handling the big high pressure turns, where they're positioning the sled or their body or everything. And it's like you do this bang, 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 and it's over. And you do it again and you do it again. And it teaches you to storytell in a very efficient manner and get your information out fast. And I mean, it's such a fast sport. It's pretty exhilarating. And so that was cool. I enjoyed it. And I still do that. I've done 3 Winter Olympics doing the sliding sports.
And so they're like, all right, well, he killed this. Let's just throw, what else do they race? And then they started throwing track and field at you, or how did that one come about?
I did a little bit of track and field in those early days. I can't remember, it was either 2013 or 2014. I did the Penn relays at Franklin Field, and it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. Like it goes for basically a week or something. They have something like 20,000 athletes that just do the relays all week long. And then you get to the weekend, which is the part that we broadcast where it's the pros, and collegiate athletes and the pros, and it's just chaos. And I'm thinking, used to this cushy booth that's air conditioned and nice and quiet and all that. And they're like, oh no, there's your booth right there. You're sitting in the grandstand. The fans are right there. The fans are right there. And there's a huge Jamaican contingent, like supporting their athletes, and it's really raucous and loud, and horns and whistles and stuff, and you can hardly hear with your headsets on. But it was such an infectious environment. It was unreal. So I survived that. I did a couple of other Diamond League events, and then I didn't do any track and field until 2018. That's where I picked up on this current stint. So doing national championships, world championships, some Diamond League stuff, and of course the Olympics. So I've done now 3 winter games and 3 summer games, and the last 2 summer games have been the ones that I've done track and field on. So Tokyo and Paris. And
is the Olympics kind of like the holy grail for a play-by-play caller?
I would say so. Yeah, certainly on track and field. Yeah, because you've got those epic moments, and especially in Paris, just a few weeks ago, to be sitting in a stadium of 70,000 people, where the noise is just so deafening, but it's so exciting. It's amazing, and you've got these athletes that are just thoroughbreds that are just performing just physical miracles, and it's so much fun as a fan of sport, right? It's just so much fun to be in the middle of it all, and to have the opportunity and the privilege of talking about it and adding to that excitement and telling an athlete's backstory. And a lot of the athletes have had a hard time getting to where they are.
Yeah, of course.
Whether that be physical issues or family issues or financial issues, and to see them have their crowning moment, their glorious moment in front of the world, it's awesome.
And I know for track and field, there are kind of events throughout the year, and I know Olympics is once every 4 years, but you call all the different events, all the world championship rounds, whatever. So that's sort of consistent throughout the year, right? Obviously with IndyCar or NASCAR, Formula One, it's the same people, same story, same drivers for 18 to 24, 36, whatever races a year. But when you're doing something that's a little more obscure for you, like say bobsled or one of the other Olympic sports that you're not following all year long, every year in between. What is that preparation process like for you? How do you sit down, learn all? Because I remember watching the last Winter Olympics. I was up at my cottage, turned the TV on, Diff's calling bobsled, and you are ripping off names of like the Swedish team, like you were out to dinner with them last night, right? And you know that you know their backstory, you know how to pronounce their names, which is, I mean, in and of itself, like, got to be a full-time job preparing. So just for you as a professional, and you are, Diff, the consummate professional, what's that preparation process like for you on something that you don't do all the time?
Well, first and foremost, so much of the credit goes to the NBC Sports Olympics research department. They have, no matter on what the sport, they have these dedicated individuals that are just so detail oriented. They're all really intelligent young men and women who love sport, which is so important, and they are really meticulous with the details. We are held to a very high standard about what you are and aren't allowed to say unless it's fact-checked. So you can't just, if you see something somewhere and you go off on a tangent and tell that story about James Hinchcliffe, and it could be totally erroneous, that they don't allow that to happen. And they really arm us with a lot of great information and pronunciations. And I know in the moment we've got to get it right, and we have to watch all the tape and we have to read all the words, and then you kind of start with this much to end up with this much, and then you decide how much of that much you use. And so it's just time, mate. Like it's watching a lot of tape and it's reading. And I'm very blessed. I'm deficient in a lot of things, but I do have a good memory. So I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for that. And I tend to absorb things reasonably well. If I see it or read it or write it, I'll remember it. And so it's just time. It's just time. And I enjoy watching, before Daytona, I watched the entire NASCAR season and took notes per race. And that helped me land in Daytona with a theme and a thread. And I haven't remembered it all. Of course I haven't. But it enough of it soaked in to arm me with enough confidence to jump on the mic in Daytona and attack NASCAR. And so if it's bobsled or skeleton or luge or track and field, I missed the entire indoor track and field season this year. And my first meet was the Olympic trials. So I had a lot of catch up to do there. But again, the research department helped us enormously. And then you've just got to dedicate yourself. You've got to lock yourself away. I was having this conversation just recently with Mike Tirico, our main host, and the voice of so many premium sports on our network. And I asked him specifically about Sunday Night Football, and how he prepares. And he has specific times in the week where this gets turned off, and he goes into his home office, and these days are dedicated to this, and this, and you just have to. Mate, you know what it's like, and you're really good at it too, is that you have to lock yourself away and give that time to the research so that you feel ready to go on air.
You got to be regimented about it. It's got to be like going to the gym as an athlete or, studying as a student. Like you got to set that time aside and really get it done.
Yeah.
So with having called Indy 500s, Rolex 24s, Le Mans 24, the Olympics on multiple sports, across multiple years, summer and winter, what's the bucket list event for Leigh Diffey that he hasn't done that he'd love to call at some point?
That's a good question. Well, now that I'm doing NASCAR, I'd love to do the Daytona 500.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you did the 400, so you're almost there. But
yeah, I did. I was 100 miles short.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot left, Hinch, I don't think. I mean, growing up, I played Aussie rules football as a kid. I'd love to call an AFL grand final, but that's never going to happen, right? Because I'm not. You're going to be immersed in that forever. So probably on the motorsport front, it'd be the Daytona 500, because then I've done the Bathurst 1000 back in Australia. I've done the Monaco Grand Prix in Formula One, Le Mans, Daytona, as you said, Sebring, Rolex 24, World Rally. Supercross, I've done the legendary A1 Supercross, I've done Pro Motocross, MotoGP, World Superbikes, maybe a Speedway Grand Prix in Europe, in Poland or somewhere like that. Because I did call Speedway back in Australia, but the European Speedway Grand Prix series is unreal, and I'd love to have a crack at that one day.
All right, bud. This has been so generous of you to tell us a story and take the time. I do want to end with one quick thing, though. You are a very proud father of 2 strapping young gentlemen who are now getting into competitive motorsports themselves on bikes, on 2 wheels.
At a low level.
Well, hey, you got to start somewhere.
Were you just tired of having money?
Yeah.
No.
So
I was tired of getting asked.
Yeah. Persistence is key, kids. Remember that. What's it like being a racing dad?
Well, I've only gone to one because of my schedule, and I'm not a good
not a good spectator.
Dad.
No.
Not a good spectating dad. And but I'm proud of them. They love it. I mean, they have their regular sports. They do wrestling and they do football, American football. So that's their mainstream sport, and they've run track as well. But they love their dirt bikes, and I just think, just so many of my friends, and they hear all racing stories and different things, and they wanted to experience what that gate drop was like, and I'm glad that they have. They've been mixing it up. They do some a little bit of low level motocross. And they've been doing some sprint enduro, where you go out in the woods and you got to do creek crossings and log crossings, and you're out single track and fire trails, and they love that too. So there's no grand plan here for them to become pro racers at all. But I'm really happy for them that they're experiencing that amazing feeling of the gate dropping, and you drop the clutch and away you go, and it's just. It's an infectious feeling, and even though I never raced to a high level, with every race that I call, I try and put myself in the competitor's seat. Like when I got to call your first IndyCar win, I was putting myself in your seat and just thinking how everything it took for you to get there, and your mum and dad, and just that feeling of what it's like, and coming across the line first, which I didn't experience many times at all. But my brother was very good, or my mates were really good, and just put myself in your position and imagine what that feels like. And that's where my level of excitement comes from.
Well, it comes across very well, bud. So I want to thank you again for taking the time. And just on a personal note, Diff, it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to get to work alongside you at NBC on the IndyCar and IMSA broadcast. I've learned so much from you. I mean, we kind of jokingly give you the nickname Uncle Diff, but you've been like a father figure to me at the racetrack, and I've learned so much from you. It is a sad thing to think that you won't be beside us in Nashville when we close the chapter for NBC and IndyCar. But I just wanted to personally thank you for everything, because it's been an absolute, like I said, absolute privilege. And I know that our paths will cross at some motorsports event again in the future, and I can't wait for it.
Thank you, mate. It won't be the last time we're in a booth together, for sure. Thank you very much. And Tim, don't ever let this man have an espresso before he goes on the air. Townsend and I got to witness it in Indianapolis, and it's a scary thing. It's like he was like a gremlin. It was unbelievable.
It was terrible influence. I'm already planning when I can give him an espresso now. I'll be in Nashville, James. Let's do it.
He told us for years, I don't drink coffee. So I don't know why on this one day he decided to have coffee, and it was not pretty.
Because it was like the 47th consecutive day at Indy, and we were, 8-hour days in the booth. I just needed a little pick-me-up, but apparently an espresso is not little for a guy that doesn't really drink it.
I'll record it for Off Track. We're doing that now.
Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Of course, Tiff. Thanks again, buddy.